Hello and welcome to the channel Windows versus Linux. In the last video I kind of took you on a tour of Linux Mint live environment, showed you where things are, and up until this point I've kind of shown you where to go and how to download alternate programs to the programs you might use now in Windows, and pretty much how to start to migrate into Linux full-time if you so choose. So in this video we're actually going to be walking through the installation process of Linux Mint if you're ready to make that step and actually install Linux as your primary operating system. So again, what you're seeing here is the live environment. This is running off a flash drive on a Windows 10 computer. So after I install this, that will completely wipe out Windows 10 and install Linux full-time on this laptop. So if you're ready to make this step, all you do is click this Install Linux Mint icon right here, and it will launch the installer. And this is very similar to how you would install Windows, so it's just following the steps. So we want English. Okay, the keyboard layout, again, we want English. You can change this if you desire. At this step, you do want to check this box because this will install all of your codecs to make pretty much everything work out of the box. So you'll get your MP3 codecs, you'll get Flash Player, you'll get the Wi-Fi hardware that you need. All of that stuff is included if you tick this box. It'll install this extra. And it will take a little bit more time if you do click that box because it's going out and finding that stuff and installing it for you, so you don't have to do it after the fact. Okay, now on this screen we have a few different options. I'm going to keep this as simple as possible for you because I know these videos are geared more for newcomers to Linux that don't have much experience with it. But I will run through some of the options here. This option that it's already ticked on, we're actually going to cover this in a separate video later on. This basically allows you to install Linux Mint alongside Windows 10. It's called dual booting. And basically what that is whenever you start your computer, you have the option of booting into Windows or into Linux. This comes with its own problems, which I'll talk about in that video when I make it, but we will cover how to do this in that video. Erase disk and install Linux Mint is what we're going to do here because it's the easiest and most beginner friendly. However, I would suggest that if you ever become accustomed to Linux and you have any experience with partitioning, you want to do this something else, because if I continue this basically allows you to partition your hard drive and set up different sections of the hard drive for different things. Now, for any newcomers, what partitioning is, it's basically whenever you buy a hard drive, you get one large partition on that hard drive. And whenever you install something like Windows 10, it will usually put everything on one partition, which is basically one section of the hard drive, or the entirety of the hard drive. If you partition a hard drive, you can section off parts of that hard drive for different things. And what this is useful for is, like let's say this here is my Windows 10. If I were to partition this and install Linux on this, I could have Linux on this partition and have my user data on another partition. And again, what that's useful for is if anything ever happened to your Windows installation or your Linux installation, if something got corrupted, let's say, your user data is safe. It's not on the same partition as your operating system. But like I said, this is a little bit more advanced. It's not too hard once you've done it a couple times, but for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to go back and we're going to do just erase disk and install Linux Mint. And again, what this will do is it will erase everything on your hard drive. So you'll want to back up your system first. You'll want to back up any pictures, documents, music, anything like that that you have stored on your computer, because this process will wipe everything on your hard drive, including whatever version of Windows you have installed. So we'll just tick that and we'll hit install now. And once you do tick that, you get some extra options here. You can encrypt your files if you so desire. This is something I never do, but it is there if you so wish to have that done. And this is something you really don't have to worry about. Logical volume management, it's another partitioning scheme. But for the simplicity, we're just going to stick to this and install. Okay, and this is just confirmation of what you're doing. Partitioning table is just going to be one partition that everything's going to be installed on. Okay. And then it's going to ask us for our time zone. I'm in Missouri, so I should be Chicago time zone. So we'll hit continue. And we're going to set up our user account. I usually do Win versus Linux. I'll keep the user the same, and I'll add a password. There we go. Now the sections down here, you can log in automatically, which means it will not ask you for this password. But I'm going to require my password whenever I log in because that's how I normally set up computers. And you can encrypt your home folder, which your home folder includes all of your user data, so your pictures, your documents, your music, your videos, all of that stuff. So this adds another layer of protection on there if you wish to have that. But I am just going to leave that blank and require password at login. Alright, so it is going to go through and install Linux Mint, and I will return as soon as that's finished. Okay, so after Linux Mint finishes installing, you'll see a pop-up that asks you if you wish to continue testing or if you wish to restart. I have restarted the system, so you'll no longer see the Install Linux Mint icon because Linux Mint is now installed on your system. And you'll be presented with this welcome screen after you reboot the system. Now, first and foremost, you'll see this little tick down here that says show this dialog at startup. If you have this ticked, you'll see this every time you restart your computer. So if you don't want to see this every time, you just uncheck that box. And basically this is just here to kind of introduce you to Linux Mint and walk you through the first steps that it recommends you do. So if we go down here to first steps, System snapshots, this is the time shift program that I showed you earlier. So I'll put in my password. And what this program does is it's, like I said, it acts as restore points for Windows 10. It basically lets you take snapshots of your system, and then if anything were to happen to your system, you can roll back to a previous snapshot where everything was working. So at this point, if you do want to set this up, you can do rsync. That's the default, just leave that as it is and hit next. And it will go through and estimate the size of your system so that it can know, how much to back up. This is pretty standard. If you have different partitions on your hard drive, you can pick a different partition for this. But if you followed what we did and just put everything on one partition, you'll just see essentially what you see here. So you just choose whatever partition you want. Next. This will ask you how often you want to make a backup. If you want to do a daily backup, you can check this. You can do weekly, monthly. You can do one every time you boot the computer, which is a bit excessive in my opinion. But I would recommend doing at least one daily, if not more. If you want to do 2 daily, it'll keep 2 backups. You could also do 1 weekly, so you'll have 2 dailies and then a weekly to go off of if anything were to happen. But that's just something you can set up. This is just preference, essentially. So if we keep that as it is, hit next. This will ask you what you want to back up, essentially. Usually you can leave this on defaults. If you want to back up your actual files, which is in your home directory, you can tick this and include all. Now this will back up all of your documents, all of your pictures, all of your user data, but this will take up quite a bit more space and it will be a little bit slower. So that is something to consider with this option. It does give you a more complete backup, but it will take up more space. So I usually just leave this on defaults because I back up my data on an external hard drive. But again, that's something for you to choose. Alright, setup complete, finish. If you want to do an on-demand backup, which is basically a backup whenever you choose to do one, you can just hit create. It'll go through and do a backup of your system, and then it'll put it right here. And all of your backups are stored in this window here. Okay? So that's time shift, pretty simple to use, very powerful. Alright, moving on, we have driver manager. Again, I'll put in my password. And that is one thing that adds to the security of Linux Mint. Unless anyone has your password or is able to get your password, they can't really do much with your system, because if you try to do anything administrative on your system, it will ask you for your password. Unlike Windows 10, where you just have a yes or no button that you can click. You know, it doesn't ask you for a password like Linux Mint does, so Linux Mint is very secure in that regard. So this is the driver manager. If you had, let's say, an NVIDIA graphics card or some other proprietary device in your computer, it would offer you the option to use a proprietary driver for whatever component that was. Since I have no proprietary stuff in this computer, it's not showing me anything here, but if it did, you could choose to use it. That's all this is. Alright, update manager. This is actually very important. This tells you a little bit about the updates. You do want to keep your system up to date, so we'll just hit OK. And this is the thing you want to take note of. Do you want to switch to a local mirror? I would always encourage this, so hit OK. Again, it's going to ask for your password. Okay, and you want to change each of these to the fastest mirror, essentially. So all you do is click on it and let this sit for probably maybe 10 seconds or so, and pick one that is the fastest. As you can see under speed here, it gets slower the further it gets down. So I'll just choose this Linux Mint one and apply that, and I'll do the same thing for this other one. So I'll click it, let it sit for a little bit. Okay, so as you can see, it's populating all the ones and their speed, so it's pulling the faster ones up top. So for simplicity's sake, I'll just choose this one and hit apply. And as you can see, your configuration has changed, so you need to click OK to update whatever you've chosen here. So you just hit OK and it'll re-update the cache. Now with the updates, like I said, you do want to keep them up to date. You do have a little update icon down here. If this is blue, that means there are updates available. As you can see, there are 2 updates available. If it is green, that means you're good on your updates, you don't need any. If it is red, that means there's usually an issue with your updates and it needs your attention. Now the good thing about Linux Mint is whenever you update or whenever you apply updates, you do not have to restart your system immediately. And it does not have to restart your system in order to apply those updates. I mean, it does, but you can choose when that happens. So it's not like Windows 10 where you get a notification saying, hey, we're going to shut down or restart within 30 seconds, you know, get your stuff saved. That's never going to happen to you in Linux Mint. You always have control over when you restart the system. Now, some updates require a restart, some of them don't. But again, you do have that control of telling your computer when you want to restart. Okay, so I'm not going to run through this now, but you do want to install all updates that are checked here. And I will tell you that once you install these updates, you'll probably see that more appear. Like I said, just go through and install everything that comes through until this icon down here is green. Okay? One thing you can do is you can go into Edit and Preferences, I believe. Under this levels, you can choose what updates appear for you. If you have different levels of updates, so you have minimal, which has no impact to the system, all the way up to sensitive, which can impact some parts of the system. Linux Mint is very good about testing their updates, so you should be fine to leave all of these checked, but it is something to consider. But I would personally keep all of these checked because it keeps the system most up to date. Okay, under options, you can show a warning if system snapshots are not set up. I usually turn that off because you'll want to create one immediately after you start the system. This option here, only show a tray icon when updates are available or in case of errors. If you check this, that means this icon will not appear unless there are updates available. So if you're up to date, this will not appear. I usually tick that off because I always want to see what the status of updates is, but again, that's just personal choice. This is something you can turn off. Don't suggest switching to a local mirror. Basically, this takes away that blue bar that asks you to switch mirrors. Again, personal preference. Auto refresh, I would say leave this on default, but this you can change how often your system refreshes and looks for new updates to apply. Like I said, I usually just leave this default, so that's what I recommend, but you can change this if you so desire. Blacklist, I've never dealt with blacklisting. I guess this means you can blacklist certain updates that come down, but again, I just leave this as is. Auto upgrade, basically what this is, as you can see here, apply updates automatically. Whenever there's updates available, it will automatically apply those updates without you having to initiate it. If you're going to use this option, I would say you have to be very vigilant on your snapshots through time shift, because if you ever get an update that applies automatically that you don't know about and it messes with your system, you want to have a way to roll back to a previous point in your system that was working. So if you're going to tick this, you want to make sure that you have, at least 3 snapshots set up. Okay. I personally would leave this blank. If there's updates available, you should be the one to initiate it, not the system. But again, personal choice. All right, so that is your update manager. Pretty simple. Desktop layout. If you're used to using, Windows, since Windows XP all the way to Windows 7, you can choose traditional. And what this does is, if you watch down here on the taskbar, it changes this to actual, what you would normally see with Windows. So any program that you have open, you'll see a larger button for it. If you choose to go more modern, like this section here, it will change that to just an icon. Okay, so as you can see there, it took those large buttons and just shrunk them down to little icons. So again, that's just subjective, that's just man, I cannot speak. That is just a personal choice, essentially. You can choose to have it more traditional or more modern. Okay. System settings, we've already looked at that. That's your control panel for Linux Mint. And again, you can change all the stuff in here. One thing I would recommend changing immediately is turning on your firewall. Oops. And like I said, all you do to that is just change this status to on. And now your firewall is turned on. That is the one thing I would say is a prerequisite after installing your system. Alright, and finally, Software Manager. Again, I'll talk more about this in a coming video when I talk about the differences between installing software on Linux versus on Windows. And actually, they give you the firewall option here because it's very important. If you launch this, it just asks you for your password and does the thing we just did. Documentation, if you have any questions or if you have any issues with Linux Mint, if you want to find out more about Linux Mint, they have very good documentation. If I launch this one, it should open Firefox to the Linux Mint page, I believe it is. Yeah, so it takes you through the installation guide, troubleshooting, all this good stuff. So Linux Mint has provided good documentation for anybody having issues with the operating system. You can look at new features, you can read the release notes, that's all on the website as well. If you need help with the system, there's web forums you can go to, which I'll launch. And basically, if anyone has had an issue with Linux Mint, chances are it's been solved and answered here. You have hardware support, you have software support, installation and boot issues. Basically, anything that's happened with Linux Mint possibly will have a solution here. So if you're having an issue with something, like say you're having an issue getting a printer installed, check this forum out and see, like you might go to hardware support, printers and scanners, things like that. So really good place to go for troubleshooting. If you don't have anything that's answered there, you can actually look at this chat room. And you can see all the users that are in this chat room right now. You can just ask a question, and everyone in here will be able to see that question and possibly answer it for you. So again, really, really good troubleshooting systems there. If you want to contribute to Linux Mint, you can do that here. You can just launch this. It'll take you to a donation page where you can donate to the project. All right. So that is installing Linux Mint. If you have followed up to this point, you will have Linux Mint installed on your system as your primary operating system. Like I said, I would encourage you to play around with it. In the coming videos, I'll show you how to install software. And also, if there's a piece of software that you use for Windows that you just have to have, I'll also be doing kind of a mini-series on how to run Windows software on Linux or alongside Linux. So stay tuned for all of those videos. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you very much.